In the far north of Tanzania, where the earth has been pulling apart for millions of years, there is a lake that almost no one visits and almost nothing survives. It sits beneath an equatorial sun, stretching roughly 56 kilometers, about 35 miles, across a shallow volcanic basin. In some places, the water is less than 3 meters, around 10 feet deep. There is no river flowing out. Everything carried into the lake stays there. Minerals, volcanic material, and dissolved salts accumulate as water disappears through evaporation, leaving the chemistry behind and concentrating it year after year. The surface can turn a deep red, and along the shore, birds sometimes appear frozen in place, wings spread, beaks open, but bodies preserved in the positions they occupied when they died. They are not alive, but some can look remarkably fresh months after death. The water can reach a pH of 12, making it extremely alkaline. The mineral coating left on some of the animals is called natron, a sodium carbonate salt that was also used by ancient Egyptians in the preservation of human remains. Yet the strangest part of Lake Natron is not what it kills, it is what depends on it. Millions of flamingos gather here to breed, using the same hostile water that makes the lake so dangerous to many other animals. The lake is lethal in one sense, but for these birds, its chemistry provides something they cannot easily find elsewhere. And behind all of it is a volcano with a geological role unlike almost any other place on Earth. Today, we're going to northern Tanzania to uncover what makes Lake Natron so chemically extreme, why dead animals can remain preserved along its shores, and how the same water that appears so hostile became essential to one of Africa's most remarkable birds. North of Arusha, roughly 120 miles away, the land settles into the Gregory Rift, the eastern branch of the East African Rift Valley. Here, northern Tanzania approaches the Kenyan border across a landscape shaped by fractures, volcanic deposits, and long periods of evaporation. Lake Natron occupies one of the lowest places in this broken terrain, spread across a basin that measures about 35 miles from end to end and 14 miles across. Its proportions are unusual. The lake covers a broad area, yet the water is remarkably shallow, generally less than 3 meters, which is about 10 feet deep across the basin. Natron is more like a broad mineral dish, with its surface rising and falling according to rainfall, river flow, and the steady removal of water into the atmosphere. Two main sources replenish that dish. From central Kenya, the southern Iwazo and Giro River carries seasonal freshwater and sediment toward the basin. Beneath the lake, more than 20 mineral-rich hot springs add another supply, rising through fractures in the crust and bringing dissolved material from deeper geological layers. Their contribution is small compared with the scale of the basin, yet chemically important because every stream and spring delivers substances that remain behind when water disappears. There is no outlet carrying that dissolved material onward. Lake Natron is a terminal lake, a closed basin whose incoming water has only one natural escape. Evaporation lifts water into the atmosphere while salts and minerals remain on the lake floor and within its changing shoreline. Each cycle leaves the remaining water more concentrated, especially during prolonged dry periods. The lake therefore becomes a kind of geological collecting bowl, receiving material from the surrounding highlands and holding it within the basin. Even the name reflects this process. Natron refers to a naturally occurring sodium carbonate mineral associated with evaporating alkaline lakes. Around the margins, mineral crusts can form geometric ridges and plates, while dust moves across exposed flats and gathers around low volcanic features. Cinder cones and old lava fields punctuate the horizon, giving the basin the appearance of a landscape still connected to its volcanic origins. The climate adds another pressure. Daytime air temperatures can rise above 104 degrees Fahrenheit for much of the year, while rainfall remains sparse and irregular, averaging around 31 inches annually. Shade is limited across the open basin, and dry winds can move fine dust between the volcanic hills and the exposed lake margins. Water arriving from distant catchments is therefore temporary. Once it reaches Natron, the surrounding climate steadily pulls it back toward the sky. About 12 miles south stands Oldoinyo Lengai, rising 2,963 meters, which is about 9,718 feet above the valley floor. Its Maasai name means Mountain of God. The volcano is more than a landmark beside the lake. Its eruptions contribute unusual minerals to the surrounding watershed, linking the chemistry of the mountain with the chemistry accumulating below. Lake Natron was designated a Ramsar wetland of international importance in 2001, recognizing the ecological value of this harsh basin. More than 20,000 people also depend on the surrounding ecosystem for livelihoods and resources. The lake therefore belongs to several stories at once: geological, ecological, and human, all gathered inside one shallow depression. South of Lake Natron, the outline of Oldoinyo Lengai rises above the Rift Valley, its name meaning Mountain of God in the Maasai language. The summit reaches 9,718 feet above the valley floor, and the volcano stands about 12 miles from the lake. From this distance, it might appear like another volcanic mountain in a land shaped by fire. Its chemistry makes it something far rarer. Oldoinyo Lengai is the only volcano on Earth known to be actively erupting carbonatite lava. Most volcanic lava is dominated by silicate minerals built around silicon and oxygen. Lengai draws from a different chemical family, producing molten material rich in sodium and calcium carbonates. That unusual composition changes the behavior of the lava from the moment it rises through the volcanic conduit. Its temperature is startlingly low for molten rock. Carbonatite lava can emerge at roughly 500 to 590 degrees Fahrenheit, far cooler than the roughly 2,140 degrees Fahrenheit typical of basaltic lava. At those temperatures, the material does not produce the familiar orange glow associated with hotter volcanic flows. In daylight, fresh carbonatite can appear almost black, flowing across the crater floor with an appearance closer to wet ink than burning stone. Its movement is equally unusual. Carbonatite lava is roughly 1,000 times less viscous than basaltic lava, giving it an extraordinary fluidity. It can spread rapidly through narrow channels and across shallow surfaces, following the slightest changes in the crater floor. Instead of piling into thick, rugged tongues, it can move with the ease of a liquid poured across a smooth surface. Then the landscape begins to change almost as soon as the eruption has ended. Moisture in the atmosphere reacts with minerals exposed on the fresh lava, encouraging new carbonate crystals to form across its surface. Sodium and potassium carbonate minerals accumulate as the material weathers, gradually replacing the dark appearance with pale shades of gray and white. A surface that looked black earlier can become coated in white mineral crust within hours. Among the minerals associated with these unusual eruptions is nyererate, named after Julius Nyerere, Tanzania's first president. The mineral is especially associated with carbonatite environments and became closely linked with the distinctive chemistry of Lengai. The volcano entered modern geological literature after its 1960 to 1961 eruption. British geologist John Barry Dawson studied the unusual material and described the sodium carbonate lavas in a paper published in the journal Nature. The title, Sodium Carbonate Lavas from Oldoñolangai, Tanganyika, sounded almost modest beside the discovery itself. Scientists were looking at lava unlike anything produced by another active volcano on the planet. Every eruption adds another small contribution to the basin below. Ash and weathered volcanic material can be carried down the slopes by rain and seasonal runoff. Carbonate rich particles move toward the lowlands, while mineral laden springs bring dissolved substances upward through fractures beneath the lake. The mountain and the basin are therefore connected by water, weathering, and gravity. With each cycle, material from the volcano finds its way toward Lake Natron, where evaporation prevents those minerals from continuing onward. The mountain supplies the ingredients, while the basin holds them in place, allowing an unusual chemistry to accumulate year after year. This connection gives the lake its distinctive character. At the edge of Lake Natron, water can behave less like a home for living tissue and more like a mineral bath shaped by evaporation. Its chemistry changes with rainfall and water level. Yet the lake can reach a pH of 12, placing it among the most alkaline natural waters on Earth. At that extreme, the water can irritate and damage exposed tissue, while its dissolved salts create another pressure that ordinary freshwater organisms cannot withstand. The mineral called natron is central to this process. In its mineralogical form, natron is sodium carbonate decahydrate, a salt that can crystallize as alkaline water becomes concentrated. Volcanic material supplies sodium-rich compounds to the basin, while evaporation steadily removes water from the mixture. As the lake contracts, dissolved substances have fewer molecules of water around them, and crystals begin to appear along the margins and on exposed surfaces. Salinity adds another layer to the chemistry. Lake Natron can become more than 10 times as salty as seawater in some conditions, producing a solution in which both alkalinity and salt concentration place severe limits on biological activity. A fish, bird, or mammal without specialized adaptations may suffer damage to skin and delicate membranes after prolonged contact. Proteins and cellular structures are also vulnerable to highly alkaline conditions, especially when exposure continues as water evaporates. The preservation of dead animals begins with a much more ordinary event. A carcass reaches the water or becomes wetted by mineral-rich spray along the shoreline. As moisture leaves the body, dissolved salts can precipitate across feathers, skin, and other exposed surfaces. Natron is hygroscopic, meaning it has a strong tendency to attract and retain water. During drying, crystals accumulate wherever mineral-rich moisture has passed. Layer by layer, this coating can become thick enough to hold the body's outward form. Feathers may remain arranged as they were when the bird came to rest. The outline of a wing can persist, along with the curve of a beak or the shape of a limb. The effect resembles stone because the outer surface becomes rigid and mineral coated, although the process is not true petrification. The original biological material is not transformed into rock through geological replacement. Alkalinity also affects decomposition. Many bacteria involved in ordinary decay depend on chemical conditions that are far milder than those found in concentrated soda lake water. As the carcass dries and its surface becomes increasingly mineralized, microbial activity can be greatly restricted. Moisture becomes scarce, salts accumulate, and the chemistry creates an environment where normal decomposition struggles to proceed. This combination gives the shoreline its unusual gallery of preserved forms. The process is gradual, unfolding through drying, crystallization, and chemical inhibition rather than through an instant transformation. An animal must already be dead before preservation begins. The lake does not reach out and create stone figures from living bodies. It provides conditions in which a body can lose moisture and resist ordinary decay long enough for minerals to become part of its visible surface. The strange appearance comes from this meeting of chemistry and time. A feather can remain recognizable while surrounded by a crust of sodium carbonate. A wing can keep its position after the life that moved it has ended. Along the shore, evaporation continues its patient work, leaving behind forms that preserve a fleeting moment long after the biological process itself has stopped. In 2010, and again in 2012, British wildlife photographer Nick Brandt traveled through East Africa while documenting animals threatened by a changing landscape. His work was gathered in the book Across the Ravaged Land. During those journeys, one shoreline encounter at Lake Natron gave him a subject unlike anything else in his photographs. Along the water's edge, Brandt found dead birds and bats coated with pale mineral deposits. Their bodies had dried into recognizable forms, with feathers, beaks, claws, and wings still arranged in striking detail. Fish eagles, swallows, flamingos, and bats appeared among the crusted remains. The scene carried the visual quality of a natural museum, except that every specimen had reached the shoreline through an ordinary death and an unusual chemical aftermath. The water itself offered a clue to the severity of the environment. Brandt used Kodak film boxes while testing the lake's alkalinity, placing the cardboard near the water. The printing on the boxes began to disappear within seconds. The observation gave him a practical sense of how strongly the concentrated water could affect materials that were never evolved to encounter it. Rather than leaving the carcasses where he found them, Brandt arranged some of the bodies for his photographs. He placed birds on branches and positioned others against the water or in postures suggesting flight. His black and white images removed much of the surrounding color, allowing the mineral-coated anatomy to become the central subject. The photographs showed every contour with unusual clarity, from individual feathers to the delicate structure of a bat's face. Brandt later described the discovery as extraordinary, recalling the fine details preserved on the animals. One fish eagle especially stayed with him because its entire body remained recognizable beneath the mineral coating. His photographs transformed a remote geological phenomenon into an image that could travel far beyond Tanzania. When the photographs were published in 2013, they spread rapidly through international newspapers, magazines, television programs, and scientific media. The images became widely associated with the idea of a lake that turns animals to stone. That phrase was memorable, although it simplified what was actually happening. The bodies had died before mineral preservation began. Contact with the water did not instantly transform a living creature into stone. Drying, evaporation, crystallization, and restricted decomposition acted together after death, allowing the outer form to remain recognizable. The photographs captured the final appearance of that process, not an instantaneous chemical attack. For scientists, the images were useful precisely because they drew attention to a real phenomenon that had existed without an audience. Lake Natron did not need a photographer to produce its mineral-coated remains. The chemistry had been operating through countless cycles of wetting, drying, and evaporation long before modern cameras reached the shore. Brandt's photographs gave those processes a human point of entry. A bird resting in mineral crust could suddenly be seen as an individual body, preserving the shape of a life that had ended there. The photographs also shifted attention from the image itself toward the landscape responsible for producing it, where geology, water, evaporation, and unusual volcanic material had been working together for generations. Each preserved form offered a small physical trace of the environment surrounding it, connecting an individual death with the larger mineral cycle of the basin. Under the surface of northern Tanzania, Africa is being pulled in two directions. The movement is measured in millimeters each year, yet its consequences belong to a different scale of time. Lake Natron occupies one small part of the East African Rift System, a zone where the Nubian Plate and Somali Plate are gradually separating. This process began roughly 25 to 30 million years ago. Across that immense interval, fractures opened through the continental crust, valleys deepened, and magma found pathways toward the surface. The rift now extends for about 4,000 miles from the Red Sea region toward Mozambique, carrying a chain of fault basins, volcanic fields, and elevated plateaus through eastern Africa. Natron rests inside one of those lowered sections. Faulting has fractured and stretched the crust, allowing portions of the landscape to subside relative to the surrounding highlands. Rainwater, river sediment, dissolved minerals, and volcanic material can collect within these depressions. The basin becomes part of the rift's architecture, shaped by forces that continue beneath the surface. The separation also helps explain why volcanoes appear throughout this region. As the crust thins, hot material from deeper within Earth can rise into the fractures. Some of that magma cools underground. Some reaches the surface and builds volcanic mountains. Oldoinyo Lengai belongs to this setting, formed within a continent whose crust is being pulled apart. Its unusual eruptions are therefore part of a much larger tectonic story. The motion has no dramatic rhythm from one day to the next. A fault may shift by an amount too small for human senses to notice, then accumulate that movement across thousands or millions of years. Valleys widen, slopes change, and volcanic centers rise from the same underlying process. The landscape around Natron is therefore a snapshot of a continent in transition. Far into the future, the consequences will become easier to recognize. Continued stretching could allow seawater to enter the developing depression, creating a new ocean basin through eastern Africa. The transformation would take many millions of years, following the same broad geological principle that once separated South America from Africa. A continent that appears solid on a human timescale can behave like a slowly opening seam when viewed across deep time. The present landscape took much of its recognizable form during the Pleistocene epoch, which began about 2.6 million years ago and ended roughly 11,700 years ago. During that period, climates shifted repeatedly, lakes expanded and contracted, volcanic eruptions altered the surface, and sediments accumulated in the rift basins. Those layers preserve more than the history of water and volcanoes. They also belong to the landscape through which early humans moved. The rift's combination of volcanic activity, shifting lakes, open grasslands, and changing climate created a setting where fossils could be buried, dated, and preserved. Human origins are therefore recorded within the same geological corridor that continues to stretch beneath Lake Natron. The lake is one small depression inside that enormous movement, yet its existence depends on the same forces. The water gathers where the crust has lowered, minerals arrive through rivers and volcanic pathways. The basin holds them in place. Far below, the plates continue their gradual separation, carrying eastern Africa toward a future coastline that has not yet been drawn. The sediments of the East African Rift hold a remarkable record of human evolution. Across Ethiopia, Kenya, and Tanzania, layers of volcanic ash and lake deposits have preserved evidence of early hominins, including Australopithecus and Homo habilis, along with later members of our own lineage. The Gregory Rift, where Lake Natron rests today, belongs to this larger archaeological and geological corridor. What makes the record so valuable is the partnership between sediment and volcanic ash. When an eruption spreads a thin layer of ash across a landscape, that material can settle into lakes, floodplains, and soils. Later deposits bury it beneath newer layers. Each ash horizon can become a marker in the geological sequence, allowing scientists to place fossils and environmental changes within a more reliable chronology. This approach is called tephrochronology. Volcanic ash contains minerals that can be chemically identified and compared between distant sites. When an ash layer has a known age, it can serve as a timestamp across the surrounding landscape. The East African Rift contains many such layers, giving researchers an unusually detailed framework for tracing changes through the Pliocene and Pleistocene epochs. Around Lake Natron, the sedimentary record reaches into periods when early human relatives were moving through changing landscapes of woodland, grassland, and lake margins. The exact shape of the lake has shifted through geological time, responding to rainfall, evaporation, volcanic activity, and movements within the rift. Even so, water has repeatedly gathered in these depressions, creating places where sediments could accumulate and preserve fragments of the past. For early humans, this was a landscape of continual environmental change. Rainfall could expand lakes and wetlands, while dry intervals opened broader grasslands. Vegetation shifted with moisture, animals followed available food and water, and volcanic eruptions periodically covered portions of the terrain with fresh ash. Such changes created a patchwork of habitats within a relatively small region, giving early hominins new conditions to navigate across generations. The fossil record from the wider rift shows that human evolution did not unfold against one unchanging background. Species appeared, spread, adapted, and disappeared while the landscape itself continued to move. The same tectonic forces that lifted mountains and lowered basins also helped create sedimentary environments capable of preserving bones, footprints, tools, and traces of ancient activity. Some of the most important discoveries in the region came from nearby basins rather than Natron itself, which makes the broader connection especially useful. Human origins cannot be assigned to one lake or one valley alone. They emerged across a changing East African landscape where tectonics, climate, water, and volcanic activity continually reshaped the ground beneath living communities. Lake Natron belongs to this geological setting even where direct evidence of human occupation at its shoreline is limited. Its importance lies in the larger system around it. The rift created basins where sediments could accumulate, volcanoes supplied datable ash, and shifting climates changed the habitats available to early human populations. Seen this way, the lake occupies a place within a much older landscape story. Its waters, minerals, faults, and volcanic deposits belong to the same geological machinery that shaped the valleys where evidence of human ancestry survived. The record is written in layers, with each horizon preserving a small interval of Earth history, and sometimes a trace of the creatures that walked across it. The connection between Lake Natron and ancient Egypt begins with a mineral whose usefulness came from a simple physical property. Natron readily draws moisture from its surroundings. In a dry environment, this ability makes the salt an effective desiccating agent, and Egyptian embalmers turned that chemistry into one of history's most enduring preservation techniques. During mummification, a prepared body was covered and packed with dry natron for about 40 days. Water gradually left the tissues, removing the moisture required by many bacteria and slowing the processes that normally break down a body after death. The treatment was part of a carefully developed sequence that included washing, drying, wrapping, and protecting the remains. Natron became deeply woven into Egyptian funerary practice during the Old Kingdom and remained important for thousands of years. Its use continued through successive dynasties, linking generations of craftsmen and priests through a shared understanding of how the mineral could preserve physical form. The body was treated as something that needed to remain recognizable because physical integrity held an important place within Egyptian ideas about existence after death. Written records from the ancient Greek historian Herodotus provide one later account of Egyptian embalming practices. Archaeological evidence adds a more tangible record. Natron has been identified on mummified remains and associated with objects used during preparation, including vessels and surfaces connected with funerary work. The mineral was therefore part of an actual working process, handled by specialists who understood its effects through generations of practice. Much of Egypt's natron came from Wadi Natron, a chain of dry depressions west of the Nile Delta. Seasonal water collected there dissolved minerals from surrounding rocks and later evaporated beneath the hot Egyptian climate. As the water disappeared, alkaline salts accumulated in the remaining deposits. The geological process was different in scale from Lake Natron, yet the underlying principle was familiar. Water leaves, minerals remain. Natron had many lives beyond the tomb. Egyptians used it in cleaning compounds, glassmaking, ceramic work, and certain pigments. One particularly important application involved Egyptian blue, an early synthetic pigment produced through heating silica, copper compounds, calcium-rich material, and natron. The same mineral that helped dry the dead could therefore participate in the creation of vivid color for objects intended to endure. The word natron itself traveled through several languages before reaching modern English, with roots connected to terms used in ancient Egypt for a divine or sacred salt. Across centuries, the name stayed attached to the mineral's distinctive role in preservation and craft. For the people who worked with it, natron was a practical substance with extraordinary consequences. It could remove moisture from flesh, stabilize materials, and help preserve forms that would otherwise disappear through decay. Its chemistry required no ceremony to function, yet ceremony gave that chemistry a place within one of the world's most elaborate relationships with death. The substance could pass from a mineral deposit into the hands of an embalmer, then into the history of a civilization, carrying the same drying property through each setting. The same class of mineral occurs around Lake Natron, where evaporation continually concentrates alkaline salts within the closed basin. There, the chemistry belongs to a landscape shaped by volcanic material, seasonal water, and intense evaporation. In Egypt, natron became part of human ritual. In Tanzania, it remains part of a natural cycle that continues without interruption. Red enters the story of Lake Natron through living cells, not through the rocks around them. During the dry season, evaporation lowers the water level and leaves dissolved salts increasingly concentrated. Conditions that would overwhelm most familiar organisms become an opportunity for specialists adapted to intense salinity, strong sunlight, and alkaline water. Among the most important are haloarchaea, single-celled microorganisms belonging to the domain archaea. Their cells contain pigments called carotenoids, compounds that absorb and scatter light in ways that produce red, orange, and pink colors. Some haloarchaea use a pigment called bacterioruberin, which helps protect their cellular machinery from intense ultraviolet radiation while contributing strongly to their striking coloration. As populations become dense, millions upon millions of individual cells can collectively tint the water, Cyanobacteria add another layer to the palette. These photosynthetic microorganisms capture sunlight and use it to build organic matter, while some species produce reddish pigments that deepen the color of shallow water and salt encrustments. Their presence connects the lake's unusual appearance to one of the oldest forms of energy capture on Earth. Sunlight enters the surface, pigments absorb particular wavelengths, and microscopic life turns that energy into growth. The color is therefore never fixed. Rain can dilute the dissolved salts and change the balance between microbial communities. Dry weather can concentrate them again. Water depth, temperature, light intensity, and the availability of nutrients all influence which organisms flourish. A section of shoreline may appear pale pink, while another area carries a deeper crimson tone, with the boundary shifting as water moves and evaporation continues. Salt itself can become part of the display. As mineral crystals accumulate around shallow pools, microbial communities colonize their surfaces and narrow spaces. Pink and red films spread across the crust, tracing the changing edge between water and exposed mineral. From above, these patterns can resemble painted swirls, though every color is produced by a living population responding to the chemistry around it. Satellite observations have repeatedly captured Lake Natron from orbit, revealing broad patches of crimson, rust, coral, and white. Images collected across different seasons show that the lake can change dramatically as water levels and microbial populations shift. From that distant perspective, individual organisms disappear into color, yet their collective activity becomes the defining feature of the landscape. There is something especially striking in this arrangement. The same environment that can preserve mineral-coated remains can also support organisms whose pigments transform the lake itself. Life here occupies a narrow chemical territory shaped by salt, alkalinity, sunlight, and evaporation. Haloarchaea and cyanobacteria have found ways to turn those pressures into resources, using specialized chemistry to remain active where ordinary freshwater organisms would fail. Their existence also reaches into the deeper history of life, connecting this modern landscape with biological strategies that have persisted through immense changes on Earth. Archaea represent one of the three major domains of cellular life, alongside bacteria and eukaryotes. Their diversity includes organisms adapted to environments with extreme salt, heat, acidity, or alkalinity. Lake Natron, therefore, offers a modern glimpse of how flexible life can become when its surroundings impose severe chemical limits. The red surface is more than a color. It is a living record of adaptation, written across water and salt by organisms too small to see individually. There are places where life seems to have stepped outside the ordinary rules of the modern world. Lake Natron offers one of them. Its haloarchaea belong to a lineage within archaea that has survived for immense spans of geological time, carrying cellular machinery suited to intense salt concentrations and alkaline surroundings. These organisms are called extremophiles because the conditions they inhabit are severe for most forms of life, while remaining essential to their own biology. Haloarchaea maintain delicate balances inside their cells, while the surrounding water holds enormous amounts of dissolved salt. Specialized proteins continue functioning where ordinary proteins would lose their shape, and the cells regulate their internal chemistry against an environment that constantly pulls water outward. Their survival is therefore an active biological process, sustained by adaptations accumulated through countless generations. In the colored waters of Natron, that ancient lineage remains visible through the pigments produced by living cells. Cyanobacteria carry another piece of Earth's deep biological history. Their ancestors existed billions of years ago, long before forests, insects, mammals, or people appeared. Through photosynthesis, these organisms began releasing oxygen as a byproduct of capturing sunlight. Around 2.4 billion years ago, their activity contributed to the Great Oxygenation Event, a planetary transformation that gradually changed the atmosphere and oceans. Oxygen accumulated, minerals reacted with it, and entirely new possibilities opened for organisms that could use this reactive gas. The connection makes Lake Natron especially interesting. Its microbial communities are modern populations living under conditions that resemble some chemical extremes of Earth's early environments. The lake is not a preserved fragment of the ancient planet, because its chemistry and biology have changed repeatedly through geological time. Still, it provides a living laboratory in which salt-loving archaea and photosynthetic microbes operate under pressures that exclude most larger organisms. That makes soda lakes useful beyond Earth as well. Astrobiologists study them when considering where life might persist elsewhere in the solar system. Jupiter's moon Europa is thought to contain a deep ocean beneath its frozen exterior, and scientists have considered the possibility that parts of that ocean could be chemically alkaline and rich in salts. If microorganisms exist there, their survival would depend on chemistry rather than forests, animals, or familiar ecosystems. A place like Natron offers one terrestrial comparison for imagining such possibilities. The resemblance has limits, and those limits matter. Europa receives far less sunlight at its surface, while Lake Natron is powered by the sun and by interactions among atmosphere, water, minerals, and volcanic activity. Any life beneath Europa's ice would face a very different energy environment. Even so, the principle remains useful. Biology can occupy chemical spaces that seem hostile until an organism possesses the right molecular tools. Their world is microscopic, yet its influence reaches planetary scales. The oxygen produced by early photosynthetic microbes altered chemistry far beyond the places where those cells lived, changing which minerals could form and which organisms could survive. At Natron, extreme conditions also reduce competition from organisms that dominate more ordinary habitats. That creates room for specialized microbes to multiply across mineral surfaces and shallow water, turning chemistry into an ecological advantage. Their presence reaches backward through the history of life while remaining completely alive in the present, a reminder that Earth's oldest biological strategies never disappeared. They adapted, persisted, and found new places to continue. The lesser flamingo has made an unlikely bargain with Lake Natron. Its survival depends on a food source that thrives where most animals cannot remain for long. The bird stands on long legs, its body balanced above the alkaline water, while its feathers carry a color borrowed directly from the organisms growing below. A mature lesser flamingo can stand about 1 meter, which is about 3 feet, tall, with proportions suited to wading through shallow water. Its pink plumage comes from carotenoid pigments obtained through its diet, especially from cyanobacteria. Without those pigments, the feathers become much paler. Young birds begin life with duller plumage, then gradually acquire deeper shades as feeding continues. The color is therefore an ecological signature, written into feathers by what the bird consumes. Each shade reflects a history of feeding, digestion, and repeated contact with the lake's microscopic food web. That diet is remarkably specialized. Cyanobacteria flourish in saline, alkaline lakes where competing organisms struggle to survive. Lesser flamingos filter enormous volumes of water, separating microscopic food particles from the surrounding liquid. Their bills contain fine structures called lamellae, arranged like closely spaced filters. With repeated movements of the tongue and bill, water passes through while food remains behind. The process allows a bird to feed from a soup of microscopic organisms that would be almost impossible for a less specialized beak to collect. The flamingo's legs reveal another adaptation. Thick, leathery scales cover much of the exposed skin, providing protection while the birds spend long periods standing in water containing high concentrations of salts and other dissolved minerals. The same chemistry that would damage unprotected tissue becomes part of the habitat these birds have evolved to occupy. Their bodies carry a collection of small solutions, each shaped by generations of living at the edge of ordinary biology. Then comes the extraordinary gathering. Around 2.5 million lesser flamingos make up roughly three-quarters of the world's population, and a large proportion depends on East African soda lakes for breeding. Lake Natron becomes especially important during favorable years when water levels, food availability, and isolation from predators align. Thousands upon thousands of birds can gather across the shallows, turning the lake margin into a moving field of pink. Their dependence creates an ecological paradox. The lake's extreme chemistry protects the flamingo's food supply from many competitors, while the shallow water and surrounding landscape can make breeding colonies difficult for predators to reach. A place that excludes most large animals can therefore become one of the safest nurseries available to this particular bird. That specialization also leaves the species exposed. The lesser flamingo is classified as near threatened, and its breeding success depends heavily on a limited network of suitable alkaline lakes. Changes in water levels, disturbance, pollution, or altered river flows can affect the delicate conditions required for successful nesting. Lake Natron thus becomes both pantry and refuge. The same chemistry that limits ordinary life concentrates the microscopic food these flamingos need while helping protect their breeding grounds. Their pink feathers carry the visible trace of that relationship, linking bird, microorganism, water, and mineral into one ecological system. What appears hostile from the shoreline can become a carefully fitted home when viewed through the biology of the creature that has adapted to it. For the lesser flamingo, reproduction begins with the lake reaching an unusually narrow balance. As water recedes, broad patches of salt and mud can rise above the surrounding shallows, forming temporary islands across the breeding grounds. These platforms become foundations for nests, each one shaped into a raised cone that keeps an egg above the wet surface. Around the nesting colonies lies a natural barrier made from concentrated alkaline water. The chemistry is harsh enough to discourage many terrestrial predators from approaching the islands. Hyenas, jackals, and monitor lizards face an inhospitable crossing, while the open water creates distance that is difficult to negotiate without entering the caustic shallows. A colony surrounded by such water gains protection from hunters that would otherwise reach eggs and newly hatched chicks. Heat adds another layer to this isolation. During the hottest periods, exposed mud around the lake can reach about 50 degrees Celsius or 122 degrees Fahrenheit. The surface becomes an uncomfortable route for animals searching for food, while the nesting birds have physical adaptations that allow them to remain in the region for long periods. The arrangement depends heavily on water level. When the lake remains too full, suitable nesting islands may fail to emerge. When the water retreats too far or too rapidly, corridors across the exposed lakebed can open toward the colonies. A season that shifts beyond the narrow range required by the birds can therefore reshape the entire breeding landscape. Their nesting success is tied to rainfall, river inflow, evaporation, and the seasonal rhythm of the surrounding climate. The chicks arrive during a wetter part of the year, when fresh water entering from nearby catchments can temporarily soften the chemistry along parts of the lake margin. The adults still forage within an environment that remains demanding, yet the young encounter a landscape that changes from one shoreline to another. Shallow pools, damp mud, salt deposits, and channels can appear together, creating a complicated nursery shaped by water movement. For a newly hatched bird, even this protected setting contains hazards. Mineral-rich water can leave deposits on exposed surfaces, and young flamingos must learn where to move among the shallows. Reports from the lake have described adults helping chicks when mineral deposits collect around their legs, removing hardened material before it interferes with movement. Such observations reveal how closely the bird's behavior is tied to the chemistry surrounding them. The nest itself completes the arrangement. A mound of mud lifts the egg away from the water, while the colony gathers on ground that is difficult for most predators to approach. Thousands of birds can occupy the same specialized habitat, each relying on the same narrow combination of water level, food availability, exposed nesting ground, and physical isolation. Here, danger has become part of the breeding design. The lake's harsh chemistry reduces access, its changing waters create the nesting platforms, and its seasonal cycles determine when those platforms can exist. The flamingos have fitted their reproductive lives into a landscape whose conditions would exclude most other animals, turning an extreme environment into a nursery. The colony, therefore, depends on timing as much as place. A suitable island must appear when adults are ready to nest, remain stable while eggs develop, and stay difficult to reach until the young are strong enough to move away. Each successful season is a narrow meeting between geology, weather, water, and instinct. More than 20 thermal springs feed the margins of Lake Natron, carrying groundwater upward through fractures in the rift. Where these flows meet the lake, narrow zones of fresher water can form among the alkaline shallows. The chemistry shifts by degrees across very small spaces, creating refuges where a few specialized animals can persist. Among them are alkaline tilapia, small cichlid fish belonging to a lineage found in only a handful of soda lakes in this region. One species, Alkalapia alcalica, occurs in Lake Natron and nearby Lake Magadi in Kenya. Its survival depends on a physiological arrangement suited to water that would overwhelm ordinary freshwater fish. The fish must regulate the chemistry of its own blood while living in water that constantly pushes its body toward an unstable internal balance. Much of that work happens at the gills. These delicate organs exchange gases with the surrounding water, yet they also serve as active chemical regulators. Alkaline tilapia can move bicarbonate ions outward through their gill tissues, helping prevent dangerous changes inside the body. This process requires energy, because maintaining an internal environment compatible with life becomes a continuous task when the surrounding water is strongly alkaline. The spring-fed lagoons provide another advantage. Their water can be warmer than ordinary freshwater habitats, especially where groundwater rises directly from the volcanic system. Temperatures around the spring outlets can approach 38 degrees Celsius, or 100 degrees Fahrenheit. For most fish, such conditions would place heavy demands on breathing, circulation, and metabolism. These tilapia have evolved within those limits, making the warmest parts of the shoreline useful refuges when conditions elsewhere become unsuitable. Seasonal changes can rearrange these refuges. During periods of higher water, the marginal lagoons may connect with broader sections of the lake, bringing stronger salinity and alkalinity into places that had offered some relief. Fish then gather closer to the springs, where incoming groundwater maintains a different chemical character. Their world becomes a shifting network of small boundaries, with survival depending on remaining on the favorable side of each one. A few inches can separate water that supports life from water that places another burden on already specialized bodies, so movement itself becomes part of survival. Evolutionary biologists study these fish because their specialized physiology illustrates how quickly populations can respond when environments impose strong demands. The geological history of these soda lakes is relatively recent compared with the age of life itself, yet their inhabitants display highly focused adaptations. Natural selection can shape behavior, anatomy, and internal chemistry together, generation after generation, until a habitat that appears hostile becomes a viable home. The tilapia are joined by other specialists along the margins. Small crustaceans and insect larvae occupy particular pockets of water and sediment, each carrying its own solution to the same chemical pressures. Their differences matter because they show that adaptation does not follow one fixed path. Several unrelated lineages can encounter similar conditions and arrive at entirely different biological strategies. Across the shoreline, the lake becomes a living collection of experiments in tolerance. Microorganisms color the water, birds depend upon its food, fish occupy its spring fed edges, and invertebrates inhabit specialized pockets between water and mineral. Each organism meets the same chemistry from a different angle, using its own physiology to remain within the narrow boundaries that permit life. During the driest months, Lake Natron can lose much of its surface movement, leaving broad stretches of water with very little disturbance. Wind weakens, evaporation concentrates minerals, and the remaining surface can become remarkably smooth. From certain heights and angles, that polished plane reflects the sky with unusual clarity, erasing the visual boundary between water and air. For a bird crossing the Gregory Rift, such a reflection can become part of a dangerous visual confusion. Migratory birds use several forms of orientation while traveling, including the position of the sun, the landscape below, and Earth's magnetic field. A bright reflected sky can interfere with the ordinary cues of the ground. When a bird descends toward what appears to be open space, the surface arrives faster than the eye expects. Distance can also become difficult to judge when reflection and horizon merge into one field. A bird may see no obvious change in texture until its descent has already begun. The effect is strongest when the lake offers few visual interruptions, allowing the reflected sky to dominate the view. Water then becomes an extension of the sky itself. The first contact with the lake can be unforgiving. Water heavily concentrated with dissolved minerals behaves differently from ordinary fresh water, while the dense saline surface can make recovery difficult for an animal that enters at speed. Feathers become wet and heavy, and a bird that cannot regain flight may remain at the surface until exposure and chemistry take their toll. Death can occur before the mineral preservation begins, leaving the remains available for later calcification. The mirror effect is considered one possible explanation for some of the animals found around the shoreline. Nick Brandt, whose photographs brought international attention to the carcasses, could document their remarkable preservation, yet the precise circumstances surrounding every death remain uncertain. Researchers have considered reflection, accidental landings, and other causes when interpreting the remains. The victims are not limited to birds. Beetles and locusts have also been found among the mineralized remains, suggesting that insects moving across the lake margin can encounter the same deceptive surface. Their bodies may become trapped in mineral-rich water, where evaporation leaves salts and other compounds behind. Layer after layer can accumulate around delicate structures, preserving forms that would ordinarily disappear through decay. There is something unusual about the mechanism because it requires no active hunter. The lake does not pursue anything crossing above it. Its danger emerges from the meeting of light, surface geometry, animal behavior, and extreme chemistry. A reflective sheet of water can imitate the sky closely enough to alter an animal's decision, and the mistake can become irreversible once the surface is reached. From above, the same optical quality creates a very different scene. Satellite instruments have recorded the changing geometry of Lake Natron, including pale salt deposits, colored microbial zones, and patterns formed as water retreats and returns. The surface changes with rainfall, evaporation, wind, and mineral concentration, so images collected at different times reveal different arrangements. This seasonal transformation gives the lake another kind of rhythm. Its appearance is never fixed, and the conditions that produce the reflective surface belong to the same cycles that reshape the feeding grounds, expose nesting islands, and alter the narrow habitats along its margins. Light, therefore, becomes part of the lake's ecology, joining water, minerals, weather, and living organisms in one shifting system. Lake Natron keeps time through water. Its surface expands and contracts, its dissolved minerals shift in concentration, and the narrow habitats around its margins move with those changes. A season is therefore more than a change in weather here. It is a gradual rearrangement of the conditions that determine where food grows, where fish can remain, and where birds can raise their young. Rainfall begins to alter the balance as the wetter months arrive. Water enters from surrounding catchments and the Owasso and Giro River, spreading across parts of the closed basin. Fresh water dilutes the dissolved salts near the inflowing channels, while the margins become less alkaline for a period. Flamingo chicks born around the nesting season encounter these changing edges as they begin moving through the shallow water. Then the sky becomes less generous. Evaporation removes water while leaving dissolved minerals behind. The lake contracts, and the remaining water becomes increasingly concentrated. Salt deposits spread outward along exposed margins, while microbial communities respond to the changing salinity and alkalinity. Their pigments can intensify the colors across the remaining pools, giving different parts of the lake new shades as conditions shift. During particularly dry periods, sections of the basin can retreat into broad salt flats. Mineral structures form as concentrated water evaporates, leaving crystals and crusts exposed to the air. Natron accumulates among these deposits, while another mineral called trona can also appear. Trona is a hydrated sodium carbonate mineral that forms in evaporative environments, adding another component to the changing mineral landscape. Each animal responds to this chemistry in its own way. Alkaline tilapia move toward spring-fed refuges when the surrounding lagoons become increasingly concentrated. Migratory birds, crossing the rift, encounter the lake when its surface can become especially reflective, while insects and other small animals meet a shoreline transformed by drying water and expanding mineral crusts. The lesser flamingos follow an especially precise rhythm. Their major breeding colonies form when retreating water exposes suitable nesting islands, generally during the drier part of the year. The timing allows the birds to build raised nests above the water while surrounding conditions remain difficult for many predators. A difference in water level can therefore alter the entire arrangement of a colony, changing where nests can be placed and how accessible they become. Nothing in this cycle operates separately. Rainfall affects lake volume. Lake volume affects salinity. Salinity influences microorganisms. Microorganisms support flamingos. Water levels determine nesting islands, while spring flows provide refuges for fish when the main lake becomes harsher. One physical change passes through the ecosystem as a chain of smaller adjustments. This rhythm has persisted across generations, linking the lives of organisms to evaporation, rainfall, mineral precipitation, and groundwater movement. The lake's calendar is written in chemistry as much as in weather. Its inhabitants respond to thresholds that cannot be seen from a conventional calendar. Yet those thresholds decide when a habitat opens, when it closes, and when survival becomes possible. Such a system can remain stable only while its water balance remains within a certain range. Changes in rainfall, river flow, groundwater, land use, or climate can alter that balance, shifting the seasonal sequence on which the ecosystem depends. The clock still turns, but its future depends upon the forces that keep water moving through this closed basin. The value of Lake Natron has always been written in two different languages. One is the language of ecology, measured in breeding colonies, mineral cycles, and survival. The other is industrial, where the same dissolved substance becomes a raw material for glass, detergents, paper, and chemical manufacturing. Sodium carbonate, commonly called soda ash, is one of the most widely used industrial minerals on Earth, with global demand reaching many millions of tons each year. That overlap gave the lake a dangerous kind of economic appeal, because its greatest ecological strength also made it commercially attractive financially. Its waters contain an extensive natural accumulation of soda ash formed through the same evaporation that concentrates the salts and minerals along the basin. To an industrial planner, those deposits represent a resource waiting to be collected. To the lesser flamingos, they are part of a landscape whose particular chemistry has protected their breeding grounds for generations. In 2006, an Indian company proposed developing a large soda ash extraction operation at Lake Natron. The idea brought immediate concern from conservation groups in Tanzania and abroad. BirdLife International joined 56 other organizations in opposing the proposal, warning that industrial development could alter the lake's water balance. Even modest changes in inflow, evaporation, or water levels could affect the nesting islands on which the flamingos depend. A Ramsar advisory mission examined the proposal in 2008 and warned that major industrial extraction could conflict with Tanzania's international conservation commitments. The concern reached beyond the removal of minerals. Pumps, pipelines, roads, processing facilities, and freshwater diversion would introduce an entirely different rhythm into a basin whose ecology depends on delicate changes in water level. The proposed development was eventually shelved, and the project was formally abandoned in 2018. The possibility returned years later. In early 2025, Ingaresaro Valley Company proposed a new soda ash operation capable of extracting up to 1 million tons each year. The plan would have required extensive infrastructure, including pumps, pipelines, and a processing facility spread across at least 45,000 hectares. Such construction would also require substantial changes to the movement of fresh water into and through the basin, raising concerns that the lake's seasonal chemistry could be permanently altered. Conservation organizations responded alongside Maasai community elders whose lives and livelihoods are closely connected to the surrounding landscape. Scientists and local advocates argued that the risk extended far beyond one industrial site. If the lake's hydrology changed enough to disrupt breeding, the consequences could reach a species whose global population is concentrated around this single reproductive refuge. The issue became a meeting point between environmental science, local stewardship, and the international responsibility attached to a protected wetland. After months of coordinated advocacy, the Tanzanian government announced in August 2025 that the proposed project would not be permitted. The decision reaffirmed protection for Lake Natron and recognized its importance to lesser flamingos. For the moment, the industrial machinery remains absent from the basin, leaving the mineral wealth where geology placed it and the breeding grounds where generations of birds have used them. The people who helped defend that boundary include the Maasai, whose relationship with this landscape reaches far beyond the questions asked by modern conservation. Around Lake Natron, the landscape carries meanings that reach beyond measurements of water, minerals, and wildlife. For the Maasai, the presence of Old Dueño Lengai has long been woven into daily life and spiritual tradition. The mountain rises from the surrounding country as the dwelling place of Engai, the deity associated with rain, cattle, fertility, and life. Its slopes and the basin below belong to a living geography shaped by generations of movement, grazing, ceremony, and memory. The relationship is not confined to the mountain itself. The surrounding plains, springs, escarpments, and seasonal waterways all form part of the same lived territory. Old Dueño Lengai is unusual even among volcanoes. Its eruptions produce natrocarbonatite lava, a rare volcanic material rich in sodium and potassium carbonates. To a geologist, this chemistry offers an extraordinary window into processes deep within Earth. Within Maasai tradition, however, the mountain carries another kind of significance. Eruptions are understood through a spiritual relationship with Engai, giving the changing mountain a place within a much older cultural landscape. Around the community of Engarisero, cattle routes and seasonal movements have developed in response to the terrain. Pastoral life depends on knowing where grass appears, where water can be found, and where the ground becomes unsuitable for animals. Lake Natron forms a distinctive boundary within that geography. Its highly alkaline waters are unsuitable for drinking and grazing, while the surrounding plains provide roots and pasture that change with rainfall. This knowledge is practical, but it also carries memory. Generations of herders have learned the character of the basin through repeated journeys, seasonal changes, and inherited understanding of the land. A scientific map can mark the shoreline and elevation. A pastoralist carries a different map, one made from pathways, grazing grounds, water sources, weather patterns, and places associated with community history. Such knowledge can determine when a herd should move, where animals can recover after a dry period, and which routes remain usable after heavy rain. That relationship became especially visible during the controversy surrounding the proposed soda ash development. Maasai elders from communities near the lake joined conservation advocates in opposing the project. Their concern extended beyond the fate of the flamingos. Industrial alteration of the basin could affect water movement, grazing areas, access routes, and the wider landscape on which pastoral life depends. The issue therefore reached into both ecological protection and cultural continuity. Ibrahim Sakhe, a Maasai community elder, has described cattle keeping as central to Maasai identity, food, and wealth. His words place the debate in a human scale. A change to the lake basin would occur on a map, yet its consequences would be experienced through daily movement across the land, through livestock, family life, and inherited traditions. Science and Maasai knowledge arrive through different paths, carrying different kinds of evidence. One measures alkalinity, rainfall, mineral deposits, and breeding populations. The other remembers routes, seasons, grazing conditions, and the meaning attached to particular places. At Lake Natron, these forms of knowledge meet around the same physical landscape. The idea of irreplaceability therefore reaches beyond the number of flamingos or the rarity of a mineral. Other alkaline lakes exist. Other volcanic mountains rise across Africa. Other communities practice pastoral traditions. Lake Natron brings these elements together in one basin, beside one extraordinary volcano, within a landscape where natural history and human memory have become inseparable. Across East Africa and beyond, other soda lakes carry their own communities of organisms adapted to concentrated salts and alkaline water. Lake Magadi in Kenya supports specialized fish and microorganisms. Lake Bogoria, also in Kenya, attracts enormous numbers of flamingos. Farther away, Mono Lake in California has its own unusual chemistry and organisms shaped by a closed basin. Each place demonstrates that life can persist where ordinary freshwater species would struggle. Lake Natron occupies a different ecological position. Its importance to lesser flamingos comes from a particular combination of conditions that must occur together. Nesting requires shallow water, exposed mineral formations, suitable water levels, and enough separation from land predators to keep eggs and chicks protected. The salt islands provide elevated platforms within the lake, while the surrounding water creates a natural barrier. If any part of that arrangement shifts too far, the breeding landscape changes with it. The shape and timing of those islands matter. Flamingos need surfaces that emerge at the right stage of the seasonal cycle, high enough to keep nests above rising water, and isolated enough to discourage predators from reaching them. Lake Natron repeatedly produces these formations as evaporation concentrates dissolved minerals and falling water exposes the hardened deposits. The process depends on the basin's hydrology, geology, climate, and chemistry acting together. Food adds another layer. Lesser flamingos depend heavily on cyanobacteria, which flourish in alkaline waters rich in dissolved minerals. Lake Natron's closed drainage basin receives nutrients from surrounding volcanic and geological sources, while evaporation concentrates material within the lake instead of allowing it to flow away through a permanent outlet. During favorable periods, the resulting microbial production can support immense feeding concentrations. The flamingos themselves carry a record of this relationship in their bodies. Their filtering beaks are suited to gathering microscopic food from alkaline water. Their specialized legs withstand conditions that would injure many other animals. Their movements, feeding habits, nesting behavior, and breeding cycles are all fitted to a landscape with unusually narrow ecological boundaries. The species can use other alkaline environments, yet no known alternative reproduces the complete arrangement required for dependable breeding on this scale. That dependence gives the lake an importance extending far beyond its shoreline. The lesser flamingo population numbers in the millions, while a substantial majority relies on a limited number of breeding sites. When such a large proportion of a species depends on one place, the condition of that place becomes inseparable from the future of the species itself. A disturbance to one lake can therefore become a biological problem extending across an entire continent. The International Union for Conservation of Nature classifies the lesser flamingo as near threatened, reflecting pressures that include habitat change and dependence on specialized breeding environments. Conservation scientists use the idea of irreplaceability in a precise sense here. There is no confirmed substitute site known to provide the same combination of nesting structures, chemical conditions, food production, and predator exclusion at comparable scale. Lake Natron therefore represents more than a rare habitat. It is a specific arrangement produced by geology, water, minerals, microbes, climate, and animal behavior over immense spans of time. Remove one essential part, and the arrangement changes. Other lakes may resemble individual pieces of it, yet none has been shown to reproduce the whole. That absence of a backup is what makes the lake irreplaceable, and it gives its extreme chemistry a significance far beyond its strange appearance. From high above East Africa, Lake Natron becomes a study in changing geometry. Its outline, colors, and mineral patterns shift with rainfall, evaporation, and the movement of salt across the basin. An image captured during one season can look almost unrelated to another taken from the same orbital path months later. The lake is always becoming a slightly different version of itself. The Terra satellite of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration photographed Natron in March 2003, revealing deep crimson water surrounded by pale mineral deposits. The striking colors come largely from microorganisms that flourish in concentrated alkaline water, together with mineral surfaces exposed by evaporation. Across the lake, salt formations gather into curved bands and irregular shapes, giving the basin a texture that becomes difficult to appreciate from the shoreline. Longer records come from the Landsat program, whose satellite observations have followed changes across many years. During wetter periods, the lake expands and its colors become lighter as incoming water dilutes the dissolved minerals. As evaporation strengthens, the shoreline contracts and exposed deposits spread outward. White salt crusts become more prominent, while darker areas occupy a greater share of the remaining water. Seen as a sequence, these images turn the lake into a natural calendar written in changing shades. The surrounding landscape adds another layer of structure. From orbit, Lake Natron sits within the Gregory Rift among volcanic cones, lava fields, and long geological fractures. Its position becomes almost architectural when viewed from above, with the basin forming a narrow feature within a landscape shaped by tectonic movement. The patterns are easier to recognize at this scale, where individual shores merge into larger lines carved by the movement of Earth's crust. Mineral deposits also leave a record of evaporation. Salt surfaces expand as water disappears, fracture under heat and drying, then dissolve again when rainfall returns. New deposits form in different places, creating a surface that rarely repeats itself exactly. Satellite images, therefore, preserve more than scenery. They provide a visual history of how water, minerals, and climate have interacted across successive seasons. During years of heavy flamingo breeding, another change can appear from above. Dense concentrations of birds gather across feeding areas, adding pale pink tones to portions of the lake. From orbital distance, thousands of individual animals merge into a single broad pattern, turning living movement into something that resembles a feature of the water itself. The unusual palette has also drawn the attention of planetary scientists. Lake Natron resembles certain imagined landscapes of early Mars, where alkaline water, volcanic minerals, and concentrated salts may once have existed together. Scientists studying the possibility of ancient Martian habitability examine Earth environments like this one because they preserve physical and chemical conditions that can help test ideas about life in extreme settings. That resemblance gives the lake another identity beyond its African geography. From the ground, it belongs entirely to this rift valley. From orbit, its mineral colors and shifting patterns can resemble a landscape from another world, offering a natural, earthly setting for thinking about how life might persist when water becomes scarce. Chemistry becomes severe, and ordinary habitats fall away. Each pass records a different moment in that exchange, preserving a view that no single photograph can fully represent. The changing surface becomes a record of living geology. A familiar recipe for habitability includes fresh water, moderate temperatures, and chemistry that remains within a comfortable range for ordinary cells. Lake Natron follows a different recipe. Its waters can become intensely alkaline, its mineral concentrations rise as evaporation removes water, and its margins can heat beneath the African sun. Still, life occupies these conditions in many forms, each carrying its own solution to the chemistry around it. Microscopic organisms form the foundation. Aloarchaea, organisms adapted to highly saline environments, can tolerate salt concentrations that would disrupt the cells of many other forms of life. Other microbes thrive in alkaline water, using pigments and cellular machinery suited to conditions that exclude most familiar freshwater organisms. Their existence changes the meaning of an inhospitable environment. A place can be severe for one organism and perfectly workable for another, provided its chemistry has been shaped by evolution to fit the surroundings. Higher in the food web, lesser flamingos gather where microscopic food becomes abundant. Their specialized feeding system allows them to draw nourishment from organisms that flourish in concentrated water. Alkaline tilapia occupy marginal waters where hot springs meet the lake, maintaining internal chemical balance while the surrounding water presses against their tissues. Crustaceans and insect larvae add further branches to this biological network. Around the basin, hundreds of bird species use the wider landscape, creating an ecosystem whose boundaries extend well beyond the water itself. The deeper lesson is written in the cells of these organisms. Life does not possess one universal operating condition. It carries many biochemical arrangements, each shaped by temperature, acidity, salinity, available nutrients, and the movement of water. Some organisms protect their proteins from intense salt. Others regulate ions across cell membranes or alter the chemistry inside their bodies. Survival becomes a matter of maintaining a workable internal environment while the world outside remains fundamentally different. This is one reason places like Natron interest astrobiologists. Europa, the ice-covered moon of Jupiter, is thought to contain a deep ocean beneath its frozen exterior. Scientists investigating that ocean consider chemistry, energy sources, and the possibility of biological activity in conditions that would differ greatly from those of a temperate freshwater lake. Europa is not another Lake Natron, and the two environments should never be treated as identical. Their value lies in comparison. Earth provides examples of how living systems respond when chemistry becomes extreme. The comparison reaches beyond temperature or salt alone. It concerns the remarkable flexibility of biological systems. If life emerged in another world, its survival might depend on chemical pathways unlike those common on Earth. A hostile environment would therefore tell us little by itself. The important detail would be whether some organism could turn that environment into a source of energy, nutrients, or stability. Lake Natron offers a small terrestrial glimpse of that possibility. Its inhabitants have each arrived at different compromises with the same demanding landscape. Their bodies, cells, feeding habits, and reproductive cycles fit conditions that seem severe when viewed from outside. Within those conditions, however, the chemistry becomes a framework for living. Across deep stretches of time, evolution can reshape what counts as possible. At Natron, that process is written in mineral water, microbial cells, fish, birds, and the intricate relationships connecting them. The lake does not offer comfort as a measure of habitability. It offers evidence that life can make use of chemistry wherever evolution finds a workable path. A closed basin does more than concentrate minerals. It keeps a record. Lake Natron has no natural outflow, so material carried into the depression has few routes of escape. Volcanic ash settles. River water arrives, carrying dissolved minerals and sediments. Rainfall leaves its temporary signature, while evaporation removes water and leaves salts behind. Layer after layer, the basin gathers traces of changing conditions. Old Doño Lengai contributes to this archive through its unusual volcanic activity. Eruptions send fresh material into the surrounding landscape, where wind and water can eventually carry fragments toward the lake. The Ewaso Ngiro River brings another kind of history, delivering pulses of sediment whenever rainfall swells its flow. Between those events come dry intervals, when evaporation becomes dominant and mineral deposits thicken. Each process leaves a different chemical fingerprint within the sediments. Deep below the surface, those sediments can preserve evidence of changing climate. Scientists can examine layers for variations in minerals, salts, organic remains, and other chemical signals. A period of intense aridity may leave one pattern, while stronger rainfall and greater freshwater input leave another. Shifts in the lake's chemistry can therefore become clues to conditions that existed long before detailed written observations began. The same record extends into biology. Haloarchaea and other microorganisms leave chemical traces as their populations expand and contract. Their abundance responds to salinity, evaporation, and nutrient availability, linking microscopic life to the physical history of the basin. When environmental conditions change, the biological community changes with them, and some of those changes become preserved in sediment. Along the shoreline, the calcified animals form a more immediate part of this archive. Their bodies are not fossils in the geological sense. There has not been enough time for the deep mineral replacement that creates many true fossils. Instead, concentrated minerals can coat and harden organic surfaces, preserving the recognizable shape of a bird, bat, or insect. The result captures a brief biological moment through chemistry. Sediment cores provide a longer view. Researchers can compare layers, identify chemical shifts, and establish sequences of environmental change. Such work has helped scientists investigate past activity around Lengai, episodes of severe dryness, and periods when flamingo numbers changed substantially. The lake floor becomes a timeline assembled without paper, ink, or deliberate design. There is something especially striking about this form of preservation because most landscapes continually recycle their remains. Organic matter breaks down, water carries dissolved substances away, and traces become scattered through soil and streams. Natron works differently. Its closed geography allows certain materials to accumulate where they arrive, while intense evaporation repeatedly concentrates what remains. The preserving power of natron was recognized far beyond East Africa. Ancient Egyptians used naturally occurring natron salts during mummification, incorporating their drying properties into elaborate funerary practices. Their traditions gave preservation a spiritual meaning. Lake Natron requires none. Its chemistry preserves forms through ordinary physical processes, leaving behind evidence without intention or ceremony. A bird resting at the shoreline, a mineral layer beneath the water, or a chemical change in the sediment can therefore belong to different scales of time while remaining part of one continuous archive. The lake holds traces of volcanic activity, climate, minerals, and living communities together, turning a basin of water into a record written by evaporation and accumulated one season at a time. Some of the most striking remains along Lake Natron begin with an ordinary biological ending. A bird or bat reaches the shore, its life processes stop, and the body enters the familiar chemistry of decay. Cells cease their work. Metabolism ends. Muscles lose their function. Under ordinary conditions, the body would gradually break apart and return its materials to the surrounding environment. Natron can interrupt that familiar sequence. Highly alkaline water and concentrated mineral salts draw moisture from tissues, while sodium carbonate can crystallize across surfaces as the body dries. The process does not restore life or preserve every cell in its original working condition. What survives is the external architecture. Feathers may remain arranged along the body. Wings can retain their folded position. Fine contours around the face can persist after the living tissues have ceased to function. That distinction matters because form carries information. The outline of a wing reveals its proportions. The arrangement of feathers identifies anatomical structures. The shape of a beak can distinguish one species from another. Even small differences between individuals may remain visible. A mineral coating, therefore, becomes more than a shell around organic matter. It records physical details that would usually disappear as decomposition advances. For a bat, the preserved impression can be especially intricate. Delicate facial features, small hairs, and the shape of the mouth may become fixed within the mineral coating. The result resembles a cast made by chemistry itself, except that the original body supplied every contour. There is no artist and no deliberate design, only evaporation, concentration, drying, and crystallization following the properties of the basin. This has an unexpected connection with ancient Egyptian practices. Natron salts were used during mummification because their drying action helped remove moisture from bodies and slow decomposition. Egyptian embalmers developed elaborate traditions around preserving physical form, giving that preservation a spiritual meaning within their understanding of death and the afterlife. The lake shares the same mineral family, yet its process carries no ritual purpose. Chemistry acts without intention. The difference between preservation and continuation becomes important here. A preserved body contains no functioning metabolism. There is no awareness, circulation, growth, or repair. The individual organism has ended. What remains is a physical record of how that organism was arranged at one particular instant. Its shape can still communicate species, anatomy, and individual variation, even though the biological processes that produced that living form have stopped. That creates an unusual boundary between presence and absence. The body has disappeared as a living system, while its visible structure remains available to observation. A feather still points in a particular direction. A wing still holds its final geometry. A small face can retain details that would normally vanish into soil, water, and air. Science can describe the chemistry responsible with increasing precision. It can measure alkalinity, identify minerals, trace evaporation, and explain how drying changes tissue. Those descriptions tell us how the preservation occurs. They do not assign meaning to the preserved form. Meaning belongs to the observer, who encounters something that is chemically understandable yet emotionally difficult to place within ordinary categories. At Natron, death leaves behind a strange kind of physical continuity. Life has ended, while information about that life remains written into mineral form. The lake does not preserve the living process. It preserves the shape that process created, holding a final arrangement of matter where decay would usually erase it. Lake Natron seems to reverse the usual order of things. Conditions that appear destructive from one biological perspective become foundations for another. Its waters support chemistry that can damage ordinary tissues, while the same setting provides food, shelter, and breeding ground for organisms shaped by those conditions. The contradiction becomes clearest around the lesser flamingo. The lake is among the most important breeding places for this species in East Africa, even as its concentrated salts and alkalinity make much of the basin unsuitable for many other animals. Specialized microbes flourish where ordinary freshwater organisms would struggle. Those microbes become nourishment for flamingos, turning an extreme chemical environment into part of a food chain. The minerals create another reversal. Concentrated sodium carbonate can contribute to the preservation and calcification of animal remains after death. The same chemistry that helps end biological activity can leave physical form behind. A body reaches its final state, while feathers, contours, and other details may remain legible through mineral coating. Destruction and preservation become neighboring stages of one process. Color carries its own contradiction. The deep red tones are produced by microorganisms adapted to intense salinity and alkalinity, including Haloarchaea and other salt-loving life. These organisms belong to lineages that represent some of the oldest forms of cellular life on Earth. Their presence gives the lake an appearance associated with barrenness, while their activity helps sustain the wider ecosystem. Above the basin, Old Dueño Lengai adds another layer. The volcano releases carbon-rich gases and unusual sodium carbonate lava, contributing materials that enter the surrounding landscape and, eventually, the lake system. Volcanic inputs help supply the minerals and elements from which microbial communities draw their living chemistry. The same geological force that creates severe conditions also helps maintain the ingredients that make those conditions habitable for specialists. Even the nesting grounds carry this strange balance. Flamingos build their nests on raised mineral surfaces surrounded by water that discourages many terrestrial predators. The chemical barrier becomes part of the nursery. What would be a hazard for one animal can become protection for another, simply because bodies interact with the same environment through different biological limits. None of these relationships requires intention. Evolution works through generations of selection, retaining traits that allow organisms to survive and reproduce within particular surroundings. Lake Natron therefore offers a useful correction to the word hostile. An environment is never hostile in the abstract. Its chemistry has consequences, and those consequences differ according to membranes, enzymes, feeding structures, behavior, and tolerance. That pattern reaches beyond natron itself. Biology has repeatedly found ways into places once assumed to belong only to chemistry and geology. Acidic springs, frozen soils, deep ocean sediments, and salt-rich basins all show that the boundaries of habitability shift when the organism changes. Natron offers one especially concentrated example because so many of its relationships meet within the same basin. Seen this way, the lake becomes a meeting place between geology and biology. Volcanic material enters water. Evaporation concentrates minerals. Microorganisms exploit the resulting chemistry. Flamingos feed within that microbial world and reproduce where the same chemistry limits predators. Death leaves mineral traces along the shore, while new life continues within the basin. The lake contains no single rule separating life from danger. It contains relationships, each shaped by chemistry and time. Its apparent contradictions are therefore parts of one continuous system, where conditions that close one biological door can open another. Climate does not arrive at Lake Natron as a single event. It appears through altered rainfall, shifting water levels, stronger evaporation, and the changing intervals between seasons. Each change may seem modest on its own, yet the lake's ecology depends upon several conditions meeting within a narrow range. When those conditions drift apart, the effects can travel through the entire living system. Warmer conditions across the East African rift can increase the rate at which water leaves the basin. As evaporation intensifies, the lake contracts and dissolved minerals become concentrated more rapidly. The chemistry can move towards stronger alkalinity, changing the balance available to microorganisms and fish. At the same time, a shorter period of suitable water levels can reduce the opportunity for flamingos to establish breeding colonies on the temporary mineral islands. Successful breeding already occurs irregularly, often at intervals of 3 to 4 years when rainfall, water depth, food availability, and nesting surfaces align. Such timing leaves little room for prolonged disruption. A season that arrives too wet can cover nesting areas. A season that turns dry too quickly can alter feeding conditions before young birds have completed their development. The biological calendar depends upon a physical calendar that has become increasingly difficult to predict. Rainfall matters in another way. Flood pulses from the surrounding catchment can bring sudden additions of fresh water, temporarily diluting the salts and changing the conditions in which cyanobacteria flourish. When those waters recede rapidly, evaporation resumes and the chemistry shifts again. The lake therefore moves between states through a chain of linked changes, with each stage affecting the organisms that occupy it. This creates a delicate relationship between water and food. Lesser flamingos depend heavily on cyanobacteria, especially when feeding conditions support large concentrations of these microorganisms. If dilution becomes too strong, the chemical environment may favor different communities. If concentration becomes extreme, other biological stresses can appear. The important factor is the balance itself, because the flamingos cannot adjust their entire feeding strategy every time the lake crosses a chemical threshold. The same principle applies to the fish that survive around freshwater springs and less concentrated margins. Their refuges are limited by the geology of the basin. As water levels change, the boundaries between tolerable and severe conditions shift with them. A refuge can remain physically present while becoming less useful as the surrounding chemistry changes. Lake Natron has no independent mechanism for restoring a preferred climate. Its water comes from rainfall and inflowing rivers. Its concentration depends upon evaporation. Its mineral supply reflects volcanic and geological processes. Biology can adapt across generations, but adaptation has limits when several environmental pressures change together and the pace of change exceeds the rhythm of reproduction. For the flamingos, that creates a narrowing margin. There is no known substitute that reproduces the full combination of food, nesting surfaces, water chemistry, and protection found here. A missed breeding season may pass without obvious consequence. Several disrupted seasons can alter population dynamics, especially when other pressures are present at the same time. The lake, therefore, becomes a measure of how much variation an ecosystem can absorb before its familiar pattern begins to change. Its future rests within relationships formed among rain, rock, evaporation, minerals, microorganisms, fish, and birds. None controls the whole system, yet everyone depends upon the others remaining within workable limits. Most damage to a natural system carries at least the possibility of repair. A polluted wetland can be cleaned. A damaged forest can regenerate. Species can sometimes be returned to places where they once lived, given suitable habitat and enough time. Lake Natron belongs to a different category. Its living community depends upon a chain of circumstances assembled through geological time, with each link occupying a place that cannot be reproduced by ordinary restoration. The basin exists where tectonic forces shaped a depression within the East African rift. Volcanic activity supplied minerals, while the closed drainage system allowed those materials to accumulate through countless cycles of evaporation. The chemistry became increasingly specialized, and organisms living there adjusted through generations to conditions that would exclude most forms of life. The lesser flamingo then developed a breeding strategy suited to that particular arrangement of water, minerals, food, and nesting surfaces. Every part of this history carries a different timescale. A rainfall pattern can shift within a season. A lake level can change within weeks. A breeding colony can disappear within a single, unsuccessful year. Geological structures operate on spans measured in millions of years. Evolution occupies generations, and specialization accumulates through inherited changes repeated across immense stretches of time. These clocks do not move together, which makes the system difficult to restore once its foundation begins to change. Mining presents one possible disruption because removing water or altering groundwater pathways can affect the hydrology that maintains the lake. Climate variability introduces another pressure through changing rainfall and evaporation. Large disturbances can alter the balance among inflowing water, mineral concentration, food production, and nesting conditions. If those relationships shift beyond the range tolerated by the dependent species, restoration cannot begin with a clean slate. There is no practical method for constructing another closed volcanic basin with the same geological history. A carbonatite volcano cannot be relocated into a new depression and expected to recreate the same chemistry. A mineral surface cannot be manufactured with the evolutionary history required by a breeding colony. Even if individual birds survived elsewhere, they would still need suitable food, water conditions, nesting structures, and protection from predators. Ornithologist Sebastian Nassoma has described the scale of that dependence in direct terms, noting that every chick joining the wider population begins its life on Natron's mudflats, and that losing the lake would endanger 3/4 of the world's flamingos. The significance lies in the concentration of so much reproductive success within one specialized landscape. This is where irreversibility gains its particular weight. The concern is not measured only by the amount of habitat that could be damaged. It rests in the absence of a complete recovery pathway. A forest can sometimes grow again because its ecological ingredients remain available elsewhere. Lake Natron's ingredients are bound together by geology, climate, chemistry, and evolutionary history. Remove one essential part for long enough, and the original combination may never return. The lake itself will continue to be shaped by volcanic rock, rainfall, evaporation, and tectonic forces for a span far longer than any human generation. Its basin may remain after today's pressures have passed. Its minerals may still gather along the margins. What is fragile is the living arrangement carried within that landscape, a biological inheritance that cannot be rebuilt once its foundation has been altered. At the edge of Lake Natron, death can leave behind an image that seems almost suspended between movement and stillness. A bird may arrive over the water, descend toward a reflective surface, and meet conditions its body cannot tolerate. A bat may come to rest near the shoreline, only to encounter a chemical environment radically different from the air above it. Nothing in the scene needs to announce what has happened. The lake's chemistry acts through ordinary physical processes. Highly alkaline water and concentrated dissolved minerals interfere with biological tissues, while evaporation steadily removes moisture from exposed remains. Sodium carbonate and other minerals can accumulate across feathers, skin, and other surfaces. As water leaves the tissues, mineral crystals become increasingly prominent, tracing the contours of the body that remains. There is an almost delicate precision to this transformation. Individual feathers can retain their arrangement. Wings may remain folded in a recognizable position. Small structures around the head can persist long enough for their outlines to become part of the mineral coating. The chemistry does not preserve the living functions that once animated those structures. It preserves their physical arrangement, much as a cast can preserve the shape of something after the original material has changed. That distinction matters when looking at the animals from the shore. A preserved body can resemble a moment caught in place, yet resemblance is not continuation. The cells that once maintained the animal have ceased functioning. Respiration has ended, circulation has stopped, sensation has disappeared. What remains is matter arranged into a form that still carries information about the individual organism. The process can unfold across days and weeks as exposure continues. Sunlight encourages evaporation, while repeated wetting and drying can redistribute dissolved minerals across the surface. Portions of the body may become coated more heavily than others, depending on how they rest and how water moves around them. The final appearance, therefore, records both anatomy and circumstance, preserving something about the last position the animal occupied. Photographer Nick Brandt encountered these remains while documenting animals around the lake and later created widely known images of their mineral-coated forms. His photographs gave the phenomenon a visual presence far beyond the shoreline, where the bodies can appear almost sculptural. Their appearance invites comparisons with statues or casts, although their origin is entirely natural. Nothing in the lake chooses a body for preservation. There is no boundary between chemistry and consequence, no intention behind the mineral growth, and no awareness within the process itself. The same environmental conditions that support specialized organisms can also transform the remains of animals that cannot tolerate them. Life and death occupy the same landscape through different chemical relationships. From this perspective, Lake Natron offers a peculiar lesson in how nature can produce forms that seem deliberate without containing any design. A body arrives, its living processes end, moisture leaves, minerals gather, and a recognizable shape remains. The sequence requires no intention at any stage. Its strangeness comes from seeing a familiar form continue after the life that gave that form meaning has disappeared. The shoreline, therefore, becomes a place where appearance and process diverge, reminding us that preservation can describe matter with extraordinary fidelity while leaving the living experience entirely beyond its reach. What the lake holds is shape, not life itself, a distinction written into every mineral-coated contour. A strange thing happens when human language reaches Lake Natron. Words such as beautiful, dangerous, barren, and fertile begin to lose their clean edges. The same shoreline can support a breeding colony and preserve the remains of an animal. The same chemistry can nourish one organism while damaging another. Nothing in the landscape needs to reconcile these differences. Extreme places expose the limits of categories built from ordinary experience. For humans, safety usually means conditions within a narrow range of temperature, water chemistry, and physical stability. Biology has a much wider vocabulary. Some organisms tolerate intense alkalinity, high salt concentrations, severe drying, or prolonged exposure to minerals that would disrupt the cells of most animals. Their limits were shaped by evolution, and those limits determine what a place means to them. Lake Natron, therefore, has no single biological identity. To one species, its water can be a feeding ground. To another, the same water represents an environment where survival is impossible. For the lesser flamingo, the lake forms part of a specialized reproductive system. For animals that arrive without those adaptations, the margins can become fatal. The landscape itself remains unchanged while its biological meaning shifts from one body to another. Beauty belongs to the observer. Danger does too. The lake has no awareness of either description and no preference for a living flamingo over a mineral-coated bird. It does not recognize the significance of the enormous share of the world's lesser flamingo population associated with its breeding grounds. It has no relationship with the Maasai communities who have lived around the lake for generations. Human lives and animal lives intersect with the basin, while the geological processes continue according to physical laws. Those processes have a long history. Tectonic movement created the depression. Volcanic activity supplied unusual minerals. Water entered the basin and remained there, carrying dissolved material through repeated cycles of concentration and evaporation. From that combination emerged a chemical setting with consequences far beyond the rocks themselves. Microorganisms adapted to it. Food webs developed around those organisms. Birds adapted their breeding behavior to the resulting landscape. Seen this way, the lake is less like a single object and more like an arrangement of relationships. Change one element, and the others may respond. Alter water availability, and mineral concentration changes. Shift rainfall, and feeding conditions can change. Disturb nesting surfaces, and reproductive success may decline. The physical basin does not need to intend any of these outcomes. Its chemistry creates possibilities, and living organisms occupy the possibilities available to them. There is something clarifying in that indifference. It removes the need to describe the lake as benevolent or cruel and leaves a more precise picture behind. A volcano releases minerals. Water transports them. Evaporation concentrates them. Microbes use the resulting chemistry. Flamingos feed on those microbes and reproduce where the landscape permits. Every step follows from material conditions, yet together they produce an ecosystem found in a remarkably specific place. The lake will continue its cycles long after individual observations have faded. Rain will enter, water will evaporate, minerals will gather, and living organisms will respond according to their inherited capacities. Human pressures may alter some of those relationships, while geological processes continue on their much longer clock. Lake Natron does not need to choose a future. Its physical processes will persist, and the life connected to them will depend on how long those conditions remain available. On a geological timescale, the pressures surrounding Lake Natron occupy only a brief interval. The basin belongs to a landscape being reshaped by forces that began long before human memory and will continue long after present concerns have disappeared. Tectonic plates are pulling apart across the East African rift, opening fractures and lowering blocks of crust as the continent gradually changes its form. The rift itself has been developing for roughly 25 to 30 million years. That immense span makes a human lifetime almost invisible within the larger story. Old Doinyo Lengai, the volcano that supplies Natron with its unusual mineral chemistry, has been erupting carbonatite lava in its present volcanic history for at least 790,000 years. Volcanic activity across the surrounding region reaches farther back still, connecting the lake to a geological inheritance far older than its present shoreline. Each eruption adds material to that inheritance. Rain moves minerals downslope. Rivers carry dissolved substances toward the closed basin. Evaporation removes water and leaves concentrated salts behind. The cycle may change in intensity from season to season, yet its basic rhythm belongs to the landscape itself. A mining proposal can be approved or rejected within a few years. A government can change its policy within a single generation. The volcanic and tectonic machinery continues according to a different measure of time. Seen from that perspective, the lake is remarkably persistent across the span of human civilization. Kingdoms have risen and disappeared, languages have changed, and generations have followed one another around the rift. Through those intervals, the basin has continued receiving water, losing it through evaporation, and concentrating the minerals left behind. Natron will continue forming as long as the balance among inflow, evaporation, and dissolved minerals remains suitable. The deeper future carries a different shape. The East African Rift is part of a continental separation that may eventually produce a new ocean. Tens of millions of years from now, continued extension could allow seawater to enter the developing depression. Lake Natron might become submerged, transformed into a saline coastal remnant, or disappear beneath sediments and new volcanic deposits. The landscape that seems fixed to a human observer is therefore only a temporary arrangement in geological time. For the lesser flamingo, however, geological permanence offers no guarantee. A lake can persist while its ecological conditions change. Water levels may shift, food production may decline, nesting surfaces may become unsuitable, or human disturbance may alter the narrow circumstances required for breeding. The rocks can remain, while the biological community that depends upon them changes beyond recognition. That distinction gives Lake Natron its particular place in deep time. The volcano will continue to exist, the rift will continue to widen. Minerals will continue moving through water and returning to the shore as evaporation proceeds. These processes have no need for human approval, and their continuation is almost certain on the scale of centuries and millennia. The uncertain part is the living arrangement within them. Whether the lesser flamingo can continue using this particular basin depends on conditions that are much more immediate than the geological forces beneath it. Deep time may preserve the stage, but it does not promise that the same species will continue to inhabit it. Lake Natron can outlast the pressures placed upon it, while the ecology that makes the lake extraordinary remains dependent on choices made within a single human moment. Some places seem to invite measurement, mapping, and explanation until the landscape becomes almost entirely translated into data. Lake Natron resists that final translation. Its chemistry can be described, its minerals identified, its organisms studied, and its geological history reconstructed, yet something remains outside the measurements. The lake presents a meeting point between processes that humans usually place into separate categories. A carcass drying on the shore and a flamingo chick emerging near the same water belong to one continuous system. The minerals that create harsh conditions for many animals also help shape the environment where lesser flamingos feed and breed. The same closed basin concentrates substances through evaporation, supports specialized microorganisms, and creates nesting conditions that can shelter eggs from some predators. Life and death arrive at different moments, yet they are carried by the same physical setting. This is where Lake Natron becomes more than an unusual ecosystem. It becomes a reminder that biology is always an encounter between an organism and its surroundings. A substance can be destructive to one body and useful to another. A concentration that overwhelms one species may provide another with an ecological advantage. There is no universal definition of a hospitable environment written into chemistry itself. Each organism brings its own boundaries. The ancient Egyptians recognized part of this principle through their use of natron in preservation. They observed that a naturally occurring mineral mixture could remove moisture and slow the processes that normally break organic tissues apart. From that practical knowledge grew elaborate rituals surrounding the preservation of human remains. Their beliefs gave preservation a spiritual meaning. Lake Natron requires none. Its minerals follow evaporation, crystallization, and changes in water chemistry without intention. That difference leaves a fascinating boundary between what science can describe and what human beings choose to ask about those descriptions. Science can determine how minerals coat a feather, how salts crystallize, how alkaline water affects tissues, and how environmental conditions shape a breeding population. It can trace the physical sequence with increasing precision. Meaning belongs to another kind of inquiry. It enters through memory, culture, and the human tendency to connect physical form with the life that once occupied it. That connection can be powerful without becoming a scientific claim. A mineral surface can preserve structure, while the story attached to that structure remains something created by observers. The distinction matters because preservation and continuation describe different physical realities. A calcified bird, therefore, occupies an unusual place in human perception. Its body may retain the outline of an individual animal, including details that ordinary decay would erase, while every biological process that once sustained it has ended. The form remains available to observation, even though the life that created that form has ceased. Preservation can hold information about a life without restoring the life itself. Lake Natron offers no final interpretation of this distinction. It continues through evaporation, mineral formation, volcanic activity, rainfall, and biological adaptation. Human beings bring the questions, the memories, and the meanings. The lake contributes only its physical processes, repeated across generations and across geological time. Perhaps that is why its shore feels less like a place containing an answer than a place where the boundary between explanation and meaning becomes unusually clear. What remains at the end is the lake itself, carrying on through chemistry, geology, and life. Long after a particular season has passed, Lake Natron continues its work without marking the change. Water enters from rivers and rainfall. Minerals arrive through volcanic processes, and evaporation draws moisture back into the atmosphere. The basin remains closed. So much of what reaches it stays within the system. Its character is renewed through ordinary physical processes, repeated until they become almost inseparable from the identity of the place. The volcano above the basin belongs to a much older rhythm. Carbonatite eruptions add unusual minerals to the surrounding landscape, while tectonic movement continues to reshape the rift. Neither process follows the pace of human attention. A decision made in a government office lasts for a moment beside geological change. The ground keeps moving, the volcanic plumbing keeps evolving, and the lake responds through chemistry rather than intention. Its biological cycles have their own measure of time. Haloarchaea can multiply when evaporation concentrates the salts, contributing pigments that deepen the seasonal colors of the water. Rain can then dilute those conditions, changing the microbial community again. The lesser flamingos respond to the broader pattern, gathering when water levels, food availability, and nesting conditions align. In favorable years, enormous flocks can occupy the region, then disperse when the breeding season passes. Their presence is temporary, while the system that supports them continues. Even the mineral forms along the shoreline are temporary. Natron is readily dissolved by fresh water, so a strong rainy period can soften or erase deposits that appeared during the dry season. A preserved bird may therefore remain for a limited span before moisture returns it to the surrounding cycle. Another carcass can take its place. Preservation becomes part of a larger process of formation and dissolution, with no fixed collection kept forever. This gives the lake a different relationship with permanence. Individual animals disappear, mineral crusts fracture and wash away, water levels rise and fall, microbial communities expand and contract. Yet, the physical setting allows the same kinds of processes to recur. The pattern survives, even when its individual pieces do not. That distinction matters when looking at the future. Lake Natron itself may persist through enormous changes in the landscape, while particular ecological relationships can vanish much sooner. A species can lose a breeding ground within decades, even when the volcanic basin beneath it remains for geological ages. The endurance of the landscape, therefore, offers no guarantee for every form of life that has adapted to it. Still, the lake does not need permanence to be extraordinary. Its significance lies in the brief lives continually passing through a system that began long before human observation. Each flamingo, each microbial bloom, each mineral crust belongs to a moment inside that larger history. The water will continue to evaporate. Rain will return. Minerals will crystallize and dissolve. Birds will arrive when conditions permit, and other lives will leave traces along the shore. Nothing requires the lake to remember them. Yet, for a while, the chemistry holds their forms, and those forms allow another species, our own, to notice what time would otherwise erase. Lake Natron remains a place where geology, chemistry, and life meet without a final boundary between them. Its future will change, as every landscape does. Its cycles will continue in altered forms, carrying pieces of the past into whatever comes next.